So I think in the program it said wash for schisto, what works? And then my name next to it. And I added a question mark because I don't claim to know the answer to all of the things that I'm suggesting we discuss here, which is, I guess, the point of the forum. But I thought I'd just sort of structure the questioning around wash and schisto in terms of two broad areas, maybe some more for sort of engineering people who are interested in the details of how we treat water or build sanitation for schisto, but also a first question there about how do we just link wash people with schisto people and collaborate and make sure that efforts are we're getting value added by knowing when people are working in the same regions and working on relevant topics. So I think when it comes to linking with the wash sector from an NTD sector perspective, I think quite often the approach has to be that you find out, first of all, which wash organizations are working in your region. As I mentioned today, a lot of wash people probably don't necessarily know what schisto is, or it's very low on their priority list. You know, they're talking about controlling fecal oral illnesses normally, not so much schistosomiasis, which is a completely different pathway for exposure again, as we said this morning. And really, I think the first step really is to just make sure that they're clear about the fact that maybe with wash for schisto, we're talking about things like maybe providing safe laundry facilities, for example, and reducing exposure to infested water that way, as opposed to the standard sort of digging boreholes or putting toilets in. One sort of selling point or one benefit I think potentially is that wash folks always like to see the health benefits of their work, and a lot of the wash sector is the metrics are sort of how many wells have been dug and how many toilets have been installed. And quite often it's difficult to actually demonstrate the health benefits of that. Because fecal oral illness comes from lots of different sources, not just from wash. It's also from contaminated food. It could be from exposure to animals who are causing fecal oral illness. So the nice thing about schisto is it's quite a specific pathogen, and it's quite a specific health outcome that you can measure. So in some ways, it might be a nice surrogate measure for wash people to actually use and to justify what they're doing. We talked a bit about mapping this morning, but I think mapping is something that is really important to both map schisto prevalence, but also map things like water contact risk to identify not just hotspots of the disease, but hotspots in terms of where the water contact is maybe the highest and maybe a big driving force for transmission. I think there's maybe a bit of debate in the schisto community about whether wash would be more cost beneficial in low prevalence areas where you could maybe push towards elimination by implementing wash solutions in those low prevalence areas, or whether it's actually more cost beneficial and maybe also more ethical really to actually implement wash in the higher prevalence areas where the need is maybe higher for wash in those areas. And probably the biggest challenge, I think, is that even if you do all these things and you identify who's working where and who has the budgets to implement wash in schisto endemic regions, they might not have budgets specifically for the kinds of things that we need for cutting schisto transmission. So, we've already experienced this through some of our discussions on some projects we've been trying to get going. Is a lot of wash NGOs keen to get involved, but a lot of their funding is for building the standard toilets and wells and things. And if you talk about, well, we need to sort of look at how we can build storage tanks or laundry facilities and that kind of thing, they don't have the additional budget necessarily or the technical know-how to design those things. So those are some food for thought about how we integrate the two sectors together, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room probably have some other questions or challenges that they can raise about that. And then the other things were really just the sort of more technical questions that I raised this morning, so I've just put them up again. And some of these are things we're going to be exploring in the lab, both in Africa and in London as part of the WISER project, and coming up hopefully with some really rigorous, dependable scientific data about how we can make water safe from a schisto standpoint. But there's still some sort of big scientific questions about how we measure, for example, the effect of water treatment on circari. Should we be measuring motility, so look under a microscope and see if they're still moving, or should it be infectivity or viability? There are a lot of different sort of ways that we could go about doing that, and a lot of the studies in the literature don't take a consistent approach really. And once we figure out all of these, the other thing here about developing better ways of detecting circari is how can we bring in some of the really cutting edge techniques like using environmental DNA techniques, which the Natural History Museum here is able to implement, and how do we sort of use that data to measure the effectiveness of WASH interventions or the effectiveness of drug administration interventions. And finally, a big missing gap, I think, is not just the engineering bit. In some ways, I think, is the easy bit. The harder bit is really the behavior change and getting people overcoming some of these barriers to actually implementing these solutions in actual communities. Okay, so some food for thought on linking the sectors and also on some of the scientific challenges.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mike.